With little doubt, the 2024 Paris Paralympics had the most significant TV coverage of any other games. With the marquee sport of basketball being front and center, Jeremy Lade worked the booth like a pro, giving viewers an insider's look as Team USA went for an unprecedented three-peat. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me.
Or Opie, as we've now learned, you've endeared to that name.
Yeah, I got the nickname ever since I was about 8 or 9 years old, so it's on my business card. You can call me Opie.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, man. Let's start off with jump right in. U.S. had a pretty tough, even though they did march their way through the tourney, they had a pretty tough go. They opened up with Spain, Netherlands, Australia, France. They faced Canada in the semi, and then they went with an undefeated GB in the final. What did you think about the whole team, the whole setup of the team play and how it unfolded?
Yeah, it's definitely a different structure than we had played in the past. So those that don't know, it used to be 12 teams and a couple of different brackets, and you worked your way down. So this one here for Paris obviously cut down to 8 teams. So anytime you take 4 teams out of eligibility or that are not going to qualify, you're really starting to make it a really, really competitive pool. And I think that's what we saw on pool play on both sides, both for Pool A and Pool B. And I like the structure. Obviously, it's always a little bit sad when you're that 9th or 10th team that doesn't make it in terms of qualifying, but it does increase the competitiveness of not only the crossover games, but also the pool play games.
But the expectation level for this team had to be just astronomically high. I mean, when you consider that they're going for a three-peat, they pick up the gold in Rio, they pick up the gold in Tokyo, now they're going for the three-peat. And people keep referring to it as the 64-year streak, but still, nonetheless, 3 in a row, that puts a huge bullseye on your back.
And not only that 3 in a row piece, but you just look at the way the roster is made up and the guys that they had on for Team USA, the lineups that they were running. The expectation will be high without 2 previous gold medals. But then you add those 2 previous gold medals, the same core group going into those. The lineups that we saw in the previous 2 Paralympics are pretty similar. So yeah, definitely high expectations for Team USA.
I want to hit on a quote. We interviewed Brian Bell, who I guess you might want to call him your center, your big man in the middle. He worked the key really well, scored a ton of points. He's been around for both of those other gold medal performances. He said, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, the team was aware of the relevance of the three-peat and the significance, but they did not dwell on it. Rather, they kept a focus on winning each game, no matter what. Did you kind of get that sense that the focus? I mean, it was, even though the three-peat was gigantic, nonetheless, the win was still the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and even breaking it down a little bit smaller, you want to win the game, and that's the focus, but you got to look at possessions. So you want to win your first offensive possession, you want to win your first defensive possession, because otherwise, if you're looking at that big goal, the carrot that's dangling at the end, that adds even more pressure when you start talking about, you miss a shot and you're thinking about this might be the opportunity that slips through our fingers and we don't get a three-peat. So the ability to be able to focus on winning small stuff within the game really helped Team USA come out with that 3rd consecutive gold.
There were so many players that we could really focus on. The team roster was just unbelievable. Sirio coming back after multiple Paralympics. Bell, Jennifer, Trayvon Jennifer, Paul Schulte, who, this guy is a, world-class player who had to come off the bench. Jake Williams, who was your MVP, and 5 first-timers. What Trey Jennifer said was that when he looked at this team overall, his quote was, "Sky was the limit." Was that really what it was all about? Was this a real superstar team?
It's not just a superstar team. I think it's the way that the team was built and how you start putting those strengths into a lineup. You look at any team at the Paralympics and they had superstars. It was a roster full of superstars. You don't get there without having superstars. But Team USA was built uniquely because you had Steve Sirio, who's maybe the best all-around player. He can pass, he can shoot. He's making sure Jake Williams is getting his shots. He's making sure everybody's set up to be successful. You have Jake Williams, who's probably the best scorer on the planet. I've never seen anybody score the way he can. And they're never stepping on each other's toes. It's not Jake fighting Steve for a shot. Trey does his job better than anybody else does their job. Brian Bell, depending on what game it was, he's coming in as not your number one threat. And there's not very many teams in the world that Brian Bell isn't going to be your number one threat. So the ability for those athletes to really embrace their role, embrace their strengths, and to put all of those individual talents to make them such a tough team is what really led to this three-peat.
I got a little bit nerdy with the stats when I was talking to Trey and noticed that he really does embrace being a defender, and he had just a ton of rebounds down in the key, down on the defensive side. So I think what I'm getting at is that the different players on this roster recognize their roles, embrace their roles, and maximize their roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And, shout out to Trey. One of those hidden things is you can see stats on the box score, but the amount of times that he gets his hand on a basketball, whether it's somebody shooting, whether it's contesting, if it's tipping a basketball out of bounds and it doesn't lead directly to his stats or a steal, he is just always disrupting. And then don't sleep on his offensive ability either. Like, he's a big, tall target. He's in the dive when they're running that pick and roll. And it's not a matter of him being a non-threat. It's just the amount of threats that are around him. So he can do it on both ends of the floor.
With Coach Rob Taylor, what I've learned from talking to these guys is that he's more or less brought in a philosophy called the flow mentality. And what it's been sort of described at is basically a design to maximize ups and limit downs, knowing what each other's doing and staying on the same page. It seems to have worked quite well for this team.
Yeah, I know in my coaching days as well, what you like to do, and it sounds like exactly what Rob did, is he took a look at his roster, he took a look at his lineups, and then started to design his philosophy based on the strengths and hide some of the weaknesses of that roster. So you watch the ball move around the perimeter, you see him set up Jake Williams for mid-range and three-point shots, and that's a great high percentage shot that ultimately leads to Brian Bell getting something on the non-ball side or Steve Serio hitting some of the free throw line. So the philosophy of being able to move that basketball, putting threats in a spot where they are the greatest threat for the team really translated to how well that offense attacked the defenses throughout the entire Paralympics.
When I talked to both those guys, they were both very apprehensive about calling the wins that they had at the Paralympic Games this time around walkovers. But there were a lot where they did walk away. They were winning by 20 and 30 points. Do you think it becomes tough for a team to maintain its focus when they're playing that well and they're getting ready to come up on GB? They know this isn't going to be an easy match, but you have to be able to maintain focus even when you're winning games by blowout scores of 20 and more points.
Yeah, we're talking about a really experienced team. So you mentioned about Paul Schulte coming off the bench. You mentioned Steve Serio and Jake Williams and Trey and Brian and John Boy. This isn't these guys' first rodeo. So they know how you can ultimately take a team for granted, let them back in it. It might cost you a loss, but they've been through it before and had the ability to stay focused. Exactly what we talked about at the beginning is that they were focused on winning possessions, not winning in a big game. So if you start being like, we're up 15 or up 20 and you start to get sloppy, these experienced basketball players know what that meant.
So Brian and Trey have both indicated to me that they're both thinking about coming back, and I strongly suspect in LA 2028 they'll probably when you just get done with the games, you're pretty tired, you're beat up, you got to go home and pay some attention to your family, your job, and other things. But I suspect that they will be back. Don't you?
Well, it's hard to turn down an opportunity like that. You're talking about representing Team USA. You're talking about the biggest honor in wheelchair basketball. And then you add on to it that you get to play in LA in front of your home country. It's a big opportunity. And it is a big time commitment. So I can understand that they want to take a little bit of time off and kind of recharge the batteries with their family, make sure they're spending time and building up those relationships. But I'm with you. I would be a little bit surprised if they don't come back with the opportunity to play on their home court.
So with all those other teams that were such high quality teams, even down to Canada when they played in the semi, it still wasn't a true real contest. So what are we looking for as we venture into 2028? Who are the teams and the countries that you see on the rise who could potentially rise up and perhaps step in and spoil a four-peat?
Yeah, I tell you what, you look at Great Britain, obviously they matched up in the gold medal game, and they have a young roster. We saw some people for GB that we have seen play and give a lot of minutes. Warburton gives a lot of minutes. Lee gives a lot of minutes for them, and we've seen it. But they're not aging out by no means. What we did see is that second and third and fourth spot on their roster is they're really starting to rotate off their bench. And I thought they had a really strong rotation. And as they get some of those players a little bit more experience, a little bit less nervous in those game situations, I think GB is going to be a lot to handle because they're going to be young and up and coming and gaining some experience. And that's with a lot of the teams across the board. I thought Australia did some big things. Obviously, Canada is going to have a lot to rebuild without Pat Anderson. But even the U.S., I think Steve Serio has big shoes to fill. It's hard to put you look at the stats and Steve fills up the stats, but he does so much more. and filling in those gaps of all of that so much more is going to be harder than filling up the box scores.
Yeah, so that begs the question then with the 5 younger players who came onto the squad. Who are some of the people we might want to look at who are coming up for Team USA who may be starting to help fill those slots, even beyond 2028, as we start to look 4 more years down the road?
Yeah, I'm just a basketball junkie. So I watch these games, and as soon as they went to the bench, we saw Jeremy Meyer and Fabian Romo come off the bench. And there wasn't very many times where they weren't like instantly getting buckets. I kind of joke to be like instant offense, just add Romy, just add Fabian. And they're going to bring a lot from the offensive attack, gain some experience on the defensive end. They're going to be a handful to watch. Talon Jordan played significant minutes as a Class 1 backing up John Boy. I think we're going to see him play a big role in the future. And then AJ Fitzpatrick as a 3-0 young kid, learning from Paul Schulte, learning from Steve Serio. I think we have a very young squad coming up with a little bit of experience trickled in there, depending if you can get Brian and Trey and Jake Williams and some of these guys to come back for that LA 28.
Opie, as you approach the Paralympics and you're moving into that final year, leading up, there's a little lull the first year. It starts to build. By the third year, you're starting to really start to look at the games. Give people an idea of what kind of time commitment is involved for these guys. As you just don't jump in, you don't play on your home court and just kind of mess around. You got to go international. You have to play some of the tough tournaments. So, what does that final year of tune-up look like as you head into the games?
Yeah, it's a little bit different. Like you said, we talk about having a pipeline of athletes, so starting to develop some athletes. You mentioned about some new ones coming in for Paris. So those new ones were really spending a lot of effort and energy in those 3 years getting ready and qualifying for Paris and showing that they could do it. Where some of those senior leadership guys were probably a little bit more of a build process. They know they can rest a little bit, not do as many tournaments, not do as much for workouts. So you get a little bit more strategic about so that you can peak as you start to get into the Paralympic and you get into that year. So when you get into that third, going into the fourth year of getting ready for Paralympics, you really want a lot of games under your belt. You want to gain some experience. You want to put yourself in situations where, not to say you want to be down, but what is it going to look like if you are down? Are you ready to make some adjustments, both as a coach and as athletes?
Hey, Opie, let's go ahead and back up really quick and just go to that game with GB, the final. It was a relatively close battle. They pulled some tricks out of their hat in the fourth quarter. Now the U.S. did ultimately prevail. They got the gold medal, as we well know, 73-69. But in the fourth quarter, GB gave them a pretty good scare. That was the only quarter they outscored them, 26-20. As you were watching that game, were you getting concerned, or did you always feel as though they had the game under control?
Control is one of those tricky things. You get to that level. You don't make it to the gold medal game of the Paralympics without having the ability to come from behind, whether it's an 8-point deficit, a 12-point deficit, whatever it is in the fourth quarter. And GB showed that level of experience. They're a team that trains a lot together. They get a lot of games under their belt. They have been there before, exactly what we were talking about earlier. So that's what we saw in the fourth quarter against the U.S. And that youthful experience and youthful energy really showed in the fourth quarter.
Hey, let's talk a little bit about the broadcast because you were there. So give us an insider's look at what it's like. I mean, more and more often, the interest of saving money, networks are starting to work remotely. And I know you work remotely from Stamford, Connecticut. It's a very nice studio. Awesome environment to work in, great producers, but what's it truly like as you wake, get to the studio, prepare, get ready to go into watching and calling a game? What's the experience like?
Well, I will say this. I've been in a lot of wheelchair basketball games, been to some Paralympics. I've coached in a lot of wheelchair basketball games, championships. I had a lot of really cool opportunities under my belt in my life. Got to marry a couple of my athletes, and broadcasting was by far the most terrifying thing I did. So it was a lot of fun, but definitely terrifying. And it comes with a lot of prep work. You got to know the teams. You got to know the rosters. You got to know what scenario might come up. And if that scenario comes up, how you're going to walk through that. But definitely tons of credit to Sloan Martin, Mark Ortega, Lauren, and Alexa with NBC. We just had a great team. It was a ton of fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, I watched, a lot of it with interest just from the standpoint of broadcast, and Sloan did a great job. I always felt as though you and she had a very good connectivity. She she did go out of her way to embrace and understand the game, and it really reflected.
Yeah, listen, Sloane's a professional. I told everyone leading up, I'm just like, wait until you hear her call a game. She is unbelievable. I am her biggest fan. I thank her up and down for making it a little bit less terrifying. She did a great job of not only broadcasting, but I think it really had that professional feel to us, showing what wheelchair basketball can be, should be. And when you have that professional production, it just goes even further.
So when you go back to your room at night after you got done calling one game and now you've just internalized everything that you've just said and you got your next game to prepare for, what's it like? You have to, obviously you just don't go back to your room and you hang out. You open up that laptop, you start studying for the next game coming up.
Yeah, I would say my process is pretty similar to when I was playing wheelchair basketball. Like my trip back to the hotel, right? You kind of wind down, you're hanging out with Sloan, we were riding with Mark, and we would talk on the way back to the hotel. And I tried to spend a little bit of time reflecting where some areas that I could have made some improvements, maybe some stuff that I could have done a better job of inserting some information for the fans, making sure I was explaining it well. But then by the time you get to the hotel, you got to have that memory of a goldfish and you're starting to look at what you're doing the next day and getting ready for that next production. So taking a look at what you can do better while focusing on what you're going to do for that next game.
And at the same time, we ought to give a shout out to Matt. Matt Scott did a great job. Gold medal guy himself. He knows exactly what he's talking about. Working sidelines over there in Paris. That's not an easy job either.
Yeah, and forgive me, I forgot to mention him on our team, but Matt Scott's a rock star. We had a lot of fun. We had some really entertaining conversations getting ready for the broadcast, so we got to see each other on video and kind of had a couple of one-liners going back and forth at each other. Matt and I have known and played with each other for a very long time, and it's always good to reconnect.
All right, so let's go ahead and pitch it out there. LA 2028, it's really right around the corner. What are your expectations? Will there be a new roster? Will some of the old veteran leadership start coming back again? Will some people, who's going to retire? Give us the Opie rundown here.
Yeah, well, Steve Serio has been pretty adamant. This is it for him. I've even been texting him since the end of Paris and just checking in on him. He's at a little bit of a sore shoulder. He's fighting, and this is it for Steve Serio. And as I mentioned, those are big shoes to fill. Not just stats. You can fill stats, but leadership and keeping him focused in practices and in games that you're up 20 and making sure that the possessions are still getting won. That's a Steve Serio thing. So finding that and filling that gap is going to be really difficult. The ability to fill up the stat sheet and the scoreboard, they're going to be able to do. Jeremy Meyer, Fabian Romo, we got some guys coming in. They're going to play a big role, and some dudes that are in the pipeline as well. So I anticipate the U.S. being very competitive. Will it look as organized, as they did in Paris? It's hard to look that organized when you haven't done it for 3 Paralympics in a row. That's 12 years. They've been doing it for a long time. They've been doing it together for a long time. So anytime you change any one piece, there's big shoes to fill.
Jeremy Opie Lade, Opie, I have a hard time calling you that, but you said that you love that name, so we'll go with that. Hey, my man, I have to tell you, you did a really outstanding job. The U.S. did a really bang-up job picking up the three-peat, and it sounds like we're in for more in LA 2028.
Yeah, absolutely. And coverage like this and coverage like NBC they're throwing out there does nothing but help adaptive sports, not just wheelchair basketball, but all of adaptive sports. And the more people that know about it, the more lives we get an opportunity to change.
Jeremy, thanks so much. Really great insights. Great having you on. I look forward to having you back as we get closer to the games again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.